The dawn is a bruised shade of gray. Rain lashes against the tarmac in heavy, rhythmic sheets. Suddenly, a Navy training jet skids during an emergency landing. The left wing snaps like dry kindling. The fuselage tilts sharply into a waterlogged ditch. The cockpit canopy is jammed. Water begins to rush in. Ground crews pull back following standard protocols. Alarms wail through the mist. At the edge of the runway, a lone janitor stops in his tracks. He strips off his jacket and wraps his arms tightly. Someone screams, "Don't go back!" He runs toward the burning metal and rising water. Inside the cockpit, a pilot is trapped. Everything freezes in a single heartbeat. Jack Turner is 44 years old. Most at the Coastal Naval Air Station know him only as the shadow moving through hangars at night. The man with the mop scrubbing grease off floors and emptying bins. His presence is as consistent and as ignored as the walls themselves. But Jack's scarred knuckles and the military precision in the way he stows his cleaning supplies tell a deeper story. A single father raising 9-year-old Mia, his life is a quiet, grueling routine of school lunches, math homework, and backbreaking late shifts. Every morning, with fingers that have disassembled turbine engines, he carefully braids Mia's hair. It is a quiet ritual of love, a skill he mastered through tears and patience after his wife Sarah passed away 4 years ago. The scars on Jack's soul run deeper than the ones on his hands. 10 years ago, Jack was an elite chief aviation structural mechanic, a master of the tarmac, whose expertise was legendary across the Pacific Fleet. He was the man you called when a landing gear wouldn't lock or when a fuselage showed microscopic stress fractures that others missed. He knew the structural soul of every jet. But a tragic training accident, a catastrophic failure of an ejection seat during a routine maintenance check, left him with a shattered vertebrae and a persistent, frustrating tremor in his left hand. He was medically discharged, his wings clipped, and his identity as a warrior stripped away in a single afternoon of paperwork. Shortly after, the loss of his wife to a sudden illness left him adrift, with only Mia as his anchor. He took the janitor job because it was the only way to remain near the aircraft that were part of his DNA, and more importantly, it provided the specific, high-tier medical insurance Mia needed for her own delicate health. He stayed in the shadows by choice, wearing the gray uniform like a cloak of invisibility. He preferred it that way. It was easier to be a ghost than a reminder of a fallen hero. Tonight, he'd picked up a last-minute double shift. He needed the extra overtime to buy Mia the special orthopedic shoes her doctor recommended, the ones with the little sparkles she'd stared at in the shop window for months. The air inside the hangar smelled of ozone, salt, and JP5 jet fuel, a sensory cocktail that usually brought him peace. But tonight, the atmosphere felt charged with a heavy, static dread. Suddenly, the base's internal speakers crackled to life, slicing through the hum of the rain. "Mayday! Mayday! Emergency on runway 4 left!" Jack stopped mopping mid-stroke. He didn't just hear the sirens, he analyzed them. He recognized the specific triple-tone pulse of the crash rescue frequency, the one that indicated a catastrophic structural failure upon landing. Squeezing his trembling left hand into a tight fist until the knuckles turned white, he looked out into the torrential downpour. Through the gray sheets of rain, he saw it. A T-45 Goshawk had missed the arresting wire and veered violently into the deep drainage depression. The storm had been relentless, turning the depression into a murky, swirling lake. The aircraft was sinking nose first, its heavy engine weight dragging the cockpit beneath the waterline. On the tarmac, the standard rescue teams were already arriving, but they were hesitating. Following standard safety protocols for a potential electrical discharge in salt water and the risk of a fuel-air explosion, the commanding officer was ordering them to wait for the heavy-duty amphibious recovery unit. But Jack knew the clock was ticking in seconds, not minutes. He knew the T-45 Goshawk better than his own name. He knew that at that specific 45-degree impact angle, the canopy frame would warp against the fuselage, creating a vacuum seal that no amount of internal manual pressure could overcome. The pilot inside wasn't just trapped. They were being sealed in a metal tomb as the water rose. He looked at the distant red lights of the specialized rescue vehicles, still miles away, and slowed by the flooded perimeter roads. He remembered Mia's small, warm hug that morning before he left. "Daddy, come home safe. I'll have the tea ready," she had whispered. Jack had no orders. He had no rank. He was just a man in a yellow safety vest with a mop in his hand. But as the green water rose over the cockpit glass, reflecting the desperate rhythmic flashes of the emergency beacons, an instinct forged in 2 decades of service roared back to life. It was a call to arms he couldn't ignore. He dropped the mop. It clattered hollowly against the hangar's concrete floor. Ignoring the shouts of the MPs and the screams of, "Stay back!" he stripped off his heavy outer jacket. He didn't think about his injury, his job, or the laws of physics. He thought only of the soul trapped in that sinking cockpit, gasping for a final pocket of air. Jack ran. Every stride sent a jolt of lightning through his damaged back, but he didn't slow down. He dived into the freezing, oily water of the ditch. The cold was a physical assault, a jagged blade that stole the oxygen from his lungs. He surfaced, blinking away the stinging kerosene, and swam with a powerful, desperate stroke toward the drowning jet. He reached the cockpit just as the water began to lap at the very top of the canopy. Above him, the world was a chaos of sirens and rain, but Jack entered a state of absolute icy focus. He braced his feet against a submerged wing root, placed his shoulder against the canopy handle, and prepared to fight the weight of the ocean. He took one final, lung-filling breath. 1, 2, 3. The world beneath the surface of the water was a terrifying mosaic of green shadows and flickering, dying instrument lights. Inside the cockpit, the emergency lighting cast a ghostly red glow on the face of Lieutenant Sarah Collins. She was struggling, her movements frantic and becoming weaker. Jack could see her pressing her hands against the glass, her mouth open in a silent, desperate scream for air. The water was already up to her chin. Jack didn't panic. He knew that the moment he showed fear, she would lose her resolve. He hammered his fist against the canopy glass, a solid, echoing thud that meant "I am here." He gave her a sharp, military-grade thumbs up, locking eyes with her. He needed her to breathe slowly, to conserve what little oxygen was left in the overhead bubble. His mind, sharpened by years of technical mastery, didn't see a plane. It saw a series of mechanical problems to be solved. He knew he couldn't simply smash the canopy. The pressure differential between the outside water and the air inside was too great. If the glass shattered, the resulting implosion would likely kill Sarah instantly or crush her lungs. On the bank of the ditch, a security officer was screaming through a megaphone. "Get away from the aircraft! That's an order! It's going to blow!" Jack ignored the noise. Orders meant nothing when a life was in the balance. He reached for the external emergency pressure release valve, a small, recessed lever near the base of the frame. The impact had twisted the surrounding metal into jagged, razor-sharp ribbons. Jack reached in, the metal slicing through the flesh of his forearms, but he felt no pain, only the urgency of the task. His fingers found the lever, but it was seized, locked by the warping of the airframe. He reached into his tool belt, the one he used for fixing broken janitor carts, and pulled out a heavy-duty, long-shaft screwdriver. He jammed it into the gear assembly of the valve, using it as a lever. With a guttural roar of effort that seemed to come from his very marrow, he forced his body to bridge the gap between failure and success. The gears groaned, then snapped. A violent hiss of air escaped as the internal and external pressures equalized. The water leakage slowed, but Sarah was still trapped. Her flight suit was snagged, and her legs were pinned under the seat adjustment rail, which had buckled into a jagged V during the crash. Jack shouted through the seal, his voice low and vibrating against the glass. "Stay still, Lieutenant! Don't move your neck!" He knew the risk of a spinal injury was extreme. He stripped off his own thick work shirt, soaking wet and heavy, and rolled it into a firm, supportive cylinder. He managed to wedge it through a small opening in the seal, bracing it around her collarbone. Sarah was shivering violently, the onset of hypothermia evident in her blue-tinged lips. "Don't leave me," she mouthed through the glass, a single tear escaping her eye. "I'm not going anywhere," Jack replied, his voice carrying the weight of a solemn vow. He needed more leverage to free her legs. He looked around in the murky water and saw a piece of the broken wing flap spar floating nearby. He grabbed the aluminum bar and jammed it under the buckled seat frame. He used his entire body as a fulcrum, bracing his feet against the cockpit interior. He felt a sharp pop in his damaged back, a white-hot flare of agony, but he didn't let go. The metal groaned and shifted 3 inches. It was enough. Sarah pulled her legs free. On the shore, the rescue teams were finally mobilizing, but they were still moving too slowly, hampered by their heavy equipment. "The fuel lines are ruptured," someone yelled. "It's going to ignite." Jack could smell the thickening scent of JP-5. He knew the final gamble was the ejection system. If the salt water triggered the solid-state rocket under Sarah's seat, they would both be vaporized. He reached into the dark, oily recesses of the seat assembly, his fingers moving with a terrifying speed born of muscle memory. He found the 3 safety pins, the ones he had checked 10,000 times in his previous life. One by one, he clicked them into their manual override slots. He felt the mechanical clunk of the safety locks engaging. The seat was safe. Only then did he begin the extraction. He guided Sarah's body out of the cockpit, following the natural curvature of the frame to minimize any stress on her spine. He moved her with a practiced, rhythmic grace that belied his janitor's uniform. As they finally cleared the cockpit and began to swim toward the bank, the jet gave one final, haunting groan. The nose settled deeper into the silt, and the cockpit vanished entirely beneath the black water. Jack held Sarah's head high, fighting the current and the weight of their soaked flight gear until they reached the muddy bank. He didn't wait for the paramedics to congratulate him. He handed her over to the waiting hands, saw the flicker of life return to her eyes, and then simply collapsed onto the wet grass, his body finally surrendering to the cold and the exhaustion. He had done what he was born to do, even if the world had tried to make him forget it. The rain continued to fall, but the atmosphere on the runway had shifted from panic to a frantic, organized recovery. Medics wrapped Jack in a thermal blanket, but his eyes weren't on the ambulance. They were fixed on the submerged tail of the Goshawk. He saw a crisis that the high-tech sensors and the frantic rescue teams had missed in the chaos. The jet had settled at an angle that was now obstructing the main drainage artery of the entire airfield. If that pipe remained blocked, the rising water would flood the subterranean electrical substation within 15 minutes, knocking out the base's long-range radar and the landing lights for 3 other incoming flights currently low on fuel. Jack pushed aside a medic and stood up, his legs shaking but his mind sharp. He walked straight toward the fire chief and the on-scene commander, a major who was struggling to read a distorted sonar map. "The map is wrong," Jack said, his voice quiet but carrying a resonance that stopped the major in his tracks. "The impact didn't just sink the nose, it inverted the center of gravity because the intake is filled with mud. If you pull from the tail now, you'll snap the fuselage and dump 200 gallons of raw fuel into the base's primary water intake." The major stared at the shivering man in the tattered janitor's vest. "Who the hell are you? This is a restricted area." Jack didn't answer. He simply pointed to a specific structural bolt on the tail section that was beginning to show signs of shear stress. "If that bolt snaps, the whole thing slides into the drain. You need to pull from the nose gear with a spreader bar, and you need to keep the tension under 4,000 pounds. If you exceed that, the airframe will implode." The fire chief, a veteran who recognized the flight line talk, looked at Jack's eyes. He saw a depth of knowledge that didn't belong to a man who cleaned floors. "Listen to him," the chief ordered his team. Jack didn't stop there. He began signaling to the crane operators, using the ancient universal hand signals of the flight deck. He directed them to position their outriggers on the reinforced concrete pads, avoiding the soft mud. Sensing his absolute unwavering certainty, the team began to move like a well-oiled machine. For a brief, shining moment, the gray uniform disappeared. Jack was the master technician again, leading a master class in aeronautical salvage under the worst conditions imaginable. The fuselage stabilized. The drainage pipe remained clear. The specialists realized they were in the presence of a master. As Sarah was stabilized in the ambulance, the media trucks finally breached the gates. Cameras were being unfolded, and a public affairs officer, PAO, saw the dramatic scene of the janitor hero. He smelled a viral story that could save the Navy's image after the crash. He approached Jack with a microphone, a camera lens reflecting the flashing red lights. "Sir, the world needs to see the face of the man who saved that pilot. Give us your name. Tell us why you did it." Jack looked at the camera, then his gaze drifted back to the jet. He saw something no one else did. A faint, rhythmic blue spark near the auxiliary fuel valve in the tail section. It was an electrical short, a ticking time bomb. If he left now to be interviewed, the jet would eventually explode, destroying the evidence the investigators needed to find out why the landing gear had failed in the first place. He also knew that if he stepped into that spotlight, his life of quiet anonymity with Mia would be over. The master technician would be dragged back into a world he had fought to leave behind. "We need your name, hero," the PAO insisted. Jack looked at the man, then at the jet. "After," he said, his voice like cold flint. He turned his back on the cameras and waded back into the freezing water. He didn't do it for the fame. He did it because, in his world, a job wasn't finished until the site was safe. He disappeared beneath the surface again, his hands searching blindly in the dark for the manual fuel cutoff. He found it, his tremor vanishing under the pressure of the task. He manually closed the gates, sealing the fuel away from the spark. He stayed until he heard the final mechanical click of safety. When he finally climbed back onto the concrete for the second time, the Admiral's car was arriving. But Jack didn't wait to be thanked. While the officers were distracted by the high-ranking arrival, Jack quietly slipped into the shadows of Hangar 3. He picked up his soaked, oil-stained jacket and walked to his rusting 2005 Ford truck. He drove home through the deserted, rain-slicked streets. He needed to be there before Mia woke up for school. He needed to scrub the smell of jet fuel from his skin so she wouldn't be scared. He made it home just as the first hint of dawn touched the sky. He buttered her toast, cut off the crusts exactly how she liked, and sat in the kitchen, a ghost of a hero watching the morning news. He had chosen his daughter's peace over a medal. He was a hero in the dark, and that was all he ever wanted to be. The following morning, the Naval Air Station didn't just wake up. It exploded into activity. The guardian of the tarmac was all anyone could talk about. The Navy's Accident Investigation Board was already on site, and they were baffled. They had found the auxiliary valves closed, a move that had saved the airframe and provided the smoking gun, a faulty hydraulic seal that had been a known issue in older models. They also found a 3-page, handwritten technical analysis left on the duty officer's desk, signed only with a thumbprint in engine oil. It was a masterpiece of aeronautical forensics, detailing exactly why the jet had failed and how to fix the entire fleet. At exactly 8 5 obsidian black Humvees, led by the Admiral's personal staff car, pulled up to the humble service entrance of the maintenance building. This wasn't a security sweep. This was a pilgrimage. The Admiral, a man known for his sternness, walked into the cramped, coffee-stained break room. He looked at the supervisor, Miller, who was shaking so hard he nearly dropped his clipboard. "Where is the man who worked the runway 4 shift last night?" the Admiral asked, his voice low and vibrating with authority. He's out, sir. He's taking his daughter to her school recital," Miller stammered, thinking Jack was about to be arrested for the unauthorized rescue. "He's a good worker, sir. I'll fire him if you want." The Admiral stopped him with a single, sharp look. "You will do no such thing, Miller. That man saved a pilot, a $30 million aircraft, and the integrity of this entire base. I'm here to give him a salute, not a pink slip." Lieutenant Sarah Collins was standing right behind the Admiral, her arm in a sling but her eyes bright with a fierce, burning gratitude. She had spent the entire night demanding to know the identity of the ghost of the hangar. She had searched every personnel file for a rescue specialist named Jack and found nothing. It was only when she described the specific, calm way he had stabilized her neck that an old chief recognized the technique. "That's Jack the Giant Killer Turner," the chief had whispered. "The best tech this Navy ever produced. I thought he was dead." They tracked Jack to the local community center where Mia was performing. The officers, in their full-dress whites, entered the quiet auditorium just as Mia was finishing a piano solo. The audience, mostly parents in casual clothes, gasped as the high-ranking military presence filed in. Jack was sitting in the back row, wearing a clean but faded flannel shirt, his scarred hands resting on his knees. He didn't look like a legend. He looked like a proud dad. The Admiral didn't wait for the music to end. He walked straight to Jack, removed his cap, and stood at stiff attention. In front of the entire town, the Admiral saluted the janitor. "Chief Petty Officer Turner," the Admiral said, using the rank Jack hadn't heard in a decade. "The Navy owes you a debt that metals cannot pay, but we'd like to start with this." He held out a document, a full restoration of Jack's military benefits, a formal apology for his forced discharge, and an offer for a civilian position as the lead safety consultant for the entire Naval Aviation Command, with a salary that would ensure Mia's future would be paved in gold. Jack looked at the Admiral, then at Sarah Collins, who was fighting back tears. He then looked at Mia, who had just finished her piece and was beaming at him from the stage. The auditorium was silent, the air thick with the weight of the moment. Jack stood up, his back straighter than it had been in years. He didn't look at the document. He didn't look at the promotion. "I'm glad you're okay, Lieutenant," Jack said to Sarah, his voice gentle. Then he turned to the Admiral. "I'll take the job, but on one condition. No ceremonies, no cameras, and I want the night shift janitors at the base to get a 20% raise and better equipment. They're the ones who see the cracks before they break." The Admiral smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "Done, Chief. Welcome back." Jack didn't wait for the applause. He walked to the stage, picked up Mia, and walked out the side door, leaving the medals and the Humvees behind. He had found his honor again, not in the rank, but in the truth of what he had done. The ripples of that night changed the Naval Air Station forever. The Turner protocols were implemented across the globe, overhauling how pilots were trained for water ditch scenarios and how ground crews were equipped for structural emergencies. The drainage system at the base was completely redesigned, and the anonymous safety fund, which everyone knew was Jack's back pay, ensured that no ground crew family ever had to choose between a medical bill and a meal again. Jack Turner did take the consultant job, but he kept his office in the back of Hangar 3, right next to the cleaning supplies. He still wore his old work boots. He spent his days mentoring young technicians, teaching them not just how to fix a jet, but how to listen to the metal. He became a legend not because of the rescue, but because of his humility. Every night, before he went home, he would still take a mop and clean a small section of the floor near the entrance. "Keeps me grounded," he'd say with a wink to the new recruits. One evening, a year later, Mia was sitting on the porch of their new, comfortable house, looking at a photo in the local paper. It was a picture of a new T-45 Goshawk, and painted on the side was a small golden mop, the unofficial emblem of the Turner Squad. "Daddy," Mia asked, looking up at him as he came out with 2 glasses of lemonade, "did you ever wish you were still a pilot?" Jack looked up at the stars, then at his daughter, whose health was now perfect, and whose smile was the brightest thing in his world. He thought about the freezing water, the sparks, and the Admiral's salute, but mostly he thought about the quiet mornings they spent together. "No, Mia," Jack said, sitting down beside her. "Being a pilot is about flying high, but being a father, that's about making sure the people you love have a safe place to land. I'd rather be on the ground with you than anywhere else in the sky." Sarah Collins became a regular guest at their dinner table, eventually becoming the sister Mia never had. She never forgot the man in the yellow vest. Every time she took off, she'd look down at the hangar and offer a silent salute to the shadow moving through the lights. On Jack's desk, there was only one award. Not the Navy Cross he had been eventually given in private, but a framed drawing by Mia. It showed a man with a mop standing in front of a giant jet, with the words, "My dad, the giant killer." The news eventually found other heroes to follow, but in the heart of that coastal base, the legend of the janitor lived on. They knew that as long as Jack Turner was watching the tarmac, no one would ever have to face the dark alone. The lights in the hangar stayed on, and the story remained, written in the oil and the concrete, a testament to the fact that a hero isn't defined by the uniform they wear, but by the weight of the soul inside it. If this story of unsung bravery and a father's ultimate sacrifice touched your soul, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Join our growing community at Daddy Healing Stories, for more powerful tales of silent heroes, the unbreakable bonds of family, and the strength found in the humblest of places. Your support allows us to keep sharing these messages of hope and healing with the world. Thank you for being part of our story.